Last time, we made this hexagon pattern shape, so today we're going to combine all the skills we learned so far in this course to animate and render these shapes. So first thing some of you will notice is we need to get rid of some of these extra objects that we made in the last episode. So what I'll do is I'll left click this object here, and then I'm just going to start shift left clicking all of these objects. Then once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and press M, and this will bring up the move to collection button. Then I can choose plus new collection, and I'm just going to call this spares, and you can just press OK. Now in the top right hand corner you can see we now have a collection called spares, and to remove this from the render we simply just check this button and now everything has disappeared. Then we're going to go ahead and scale down one of our objects, so I'll just select this one here and I'm going to press S, and that will allow us to scale this down. Then I'll press G and Y to pull it a little bit more towards our camera. Then I'll left click this film camera button here so I can see our camera view, press G and Z and pull it down. Now we can see it roughly in our camera. I'll maybe move it a little bit further from our camera to maybe around here, and I'll press the film camera again to see how it's looking, and I'll press R and Y so I can rotate on the Y axis, and I'm just going to press R and Z and I'm going to get it into the same kind of position I had my other one. Great, now we have our first shape in place. Now we can go ahead and copy the transforms of the other ones to get them roughly in the same position to move them easier. So to do that, I'm going to left click the film camera button again to come out of camera view, and I'm going to keep this object selected here, and I'm going to shift left click these two, and I'm going to shift left click the first one again. Notice how it will now be highlighted yellow, meaning this is now the active selected object. Then if I press N, we can get this side menu, and if you come up to item, although by default it's usually visible in all menus, you can see we have all these transforms. This is pretty much what the scale of our object is. So in order to copy these, I'm going to go ahead and right click this rotation, and you can see if I left click copy single to selected, you can see that the rotation which I copied, which was the Y axis, has now been copied for this object here. But of course we want to do this for all rotations. So I'll right click, and this time I'm going to choose copy all to select. Now you can see it's rotated the same way as my object down here. Then we need to do the same for scale. So I'll just right click scale, and then I'm going to choose copy all to selected. Now we have the same scale. And finally, we can do the same for location. So I'll right click this, and then I'll choose copy all to selected. Now if I go back into the camera view, you can see all of our meshes are overlapping each other. This is a great and quick way to quickly scale things down at the same time. This can be great as well if you decide to add something extra later. I'm going to left click my dual mesh.002 here in the menu and press G and Y just to pull it out. I'm going to keep this one roughly in the middle, and then I'm going to do the same for the .003. Left click it and press G and Y to pull it out. I'm also going to come back to frame 1 on my timeline. Now I'm not quite happy with the rotation of all these objects, and I want to rotate them all at the same time. So what I can do is I can shift left click all of these, and then up here at the top you can see there's this transform pivot point option here. By default it's set to medium point. This means when I press R, it will rotate in the middle of all of these masses, but we want to make it so all of them rotate on their own since they're all individual objects. So to do that, I would just change it from medium point to individual origins. Now when I press R, you can see they all rotate individually. I'll maybe press R and Z to rotate them on the Z axis a little bit. Maybe around there is nice. And now when we play our animation, it should look something like this. Now if you remember, at roughly halfway through the animation here, the camera will line up in the center. So this is the point where I want to make sure everything in our scene is centered. I'll switch to this frame on the timeline, which is around 125, and I'm going to press my film camera button again, and here I might just press G and Y to move things along a little bit, and I might even press G and X to pull them back, and I can maybe even scale them down with S or scale them up a little bit. For now our animation should look something like this. If you want, you can also scale down these to match my final one, but I'm going to leave mine as they are. When we were covering animation in the earlier tutorial in this series, we learned that sometimes you can have issues with animating on the local axis, but this time we're actually going to be using this to our advantage, as I quite like the look it created. What I mean by this is we're going to be pressing R and then Z twice in order to rotate across the Z axis, but it's actually going to create a strange rotating all around effect when we do this. Of course, if you want to learn how to rotate without this effect, please feel free to let me know and I'll create a separate tutorial on how to fix this. But we're going to be using this to our advantage in this tutorial. To start off, I'll left click my first hexagon ring here, and I'm going to press I and then choose rotation. This will add a keyframe which will save the rotation at this point on the timeline. Then I'm going to come all the way over to frame 250, which is the end of my animation, and I'm going to press R, Z, and then Z again, and then I'm going to choose 180 to rotate it on the positive 180 degrees on the Z axis. Then I can press enter, I, and choose rotation. Now when we play, you can see it creates this rotating effect. Subject. So we've got our animation, but you can see this is a little bit stronger than what I went for in my final animation. So in this case, we would go ahead and try and experiment with a different rotation. So I'm going to come back to my end frame, and this time I'm going to left click this keyframe here and press X and choose delete. Then we can press R and then Z twice, and this time we'll just put in 90, which is half of 180. Then we can just press I and choose rotation. Now we've got something which is a lot more subtle. Now we've rotated this one, we'll go ahead and rotate the other ones. For the one at the very end, it actually has the same rotation as the first one, so we can go ahead and copy these. However, do keep in mind, if you've keyframed more than just the rotation, you might have some issues here. So make sure to either keyframe only the rotation, or if you're struggling to understand this concept, you can just animate this one like you animated the other one from scratch. For us though, I'll left click this one here, and I'm going to shift left click our one with the animation on it, which is now highlighted yellow, showing that this is the active selection, and we can press Ctrl L for link, and then we can choose link animation data. Now when I press play, you can see both of them are rotating at the same time. Finally, we can do the middle one, and we're actually going to do this a slightly different rotation. So first, I'm going to come to frame 1 and press I and choose rotation, and that will save the rotation at this point. Then I'll come to 250, and I'm going to choose R, then Z twice to rotate on the local Z axis, and I'm going to choose -90. Then I'll choose I and then choose rotation, and now we should have these going in the opposite way. Excellent. Now we've done that, we want to make this more of a smooth movement, because you can see how it's doing that slow at the start and slow at the end and fastest in the middle. If you remember from the animation tutorial in this course, that was the Bezier type of interpolation. So we're going to want to change these to linear. I also temporarily disabled the camera constraint, so sorry about that if any of you were confused. But if you do want to disable it in your own animation, you can just go ahead and left click this I button here and I'll turn it off, or you can just press X to remove it permanently. I'm going to keep it on for now though. Also, if you followed along in the first animation tutorial, you'll remember how we animated this camera, and you can go ahead and change the rotation of this one if you like. Right now it rotates a grand total of around 20 degrees on the Z axis, but you can make this more subtle if you like. I'm going to leave it for now though. I'm going to come back to frame 1 and make some more edits. So first I'll left click my first shape here, and I'm going to press A to select all my keyframes in the timeline, right click, and then in interpolation mode, we can change it from this smoother Bezier movement to this more straight linear movement. Notice now if I press play that the rings on the start and the end are moving at a constant pace, whereas the one in the middle is moving more slowly and gradually and speeding up in the middle. I'll then do the same for the middle one too by left clicking it, pressing A to select all keyframes, right click, interpolation mode, and choose linear. Now everything should be working properly. Next up, we're going to want to add our materials that we had earlier. So we put bronze in the middle here, and if I come down to my materials here and left click this button here, we can actually choose the material we have. But right now, we only have our studio background, and if you use the shield button, your material won't have disappeared, but otherwise it will have disappeared when we deleted the swirls. So we need to go ahead and import the materials again. If you do have it in here, you can go ahead and switch to it. Of course though, since we're going to be working with materials, I'm going to change to this third ball here. First of all, I'm going to choose file, and then I'm going to come to append. Append is like the import but for Blender files. I'll then go ahead and I'll double click my animation course.blend, which if you remember is what we saved our last project as. Then I'll open up material, and here you can see those are silver and bronze materials. So I'll left click the bronze and then control left click the silver, just like that one as well. Then we can just left click this append, and I'll import these materials into Blender. Then we can left click our middle one here, and in our red and black checkered ball, the material properties, I can click this drop down and choose bronze. Then I'm going to set these ones here to silver, and I'll do the same for the first one as well, drop down and silver. And now we have our materials set up from episode 5 of this course. Now I'm going to go ahead and save my file first by pressing Ctrl S, just in case Blender crashes, and I'm going to change to my render viewport shading mode. Awesome, it's looking pretty good so far, but you can see in my final animation, mine was a little bit brighter. And one of the ways I achieved this is I actually added a third light for this animation. So I'm going to come back to my solid mode. For you, you can stay in this mode if you like, but I'm going into solid mode just because I'm recording at the same time and it's faster on my computer. Then I'm going to left click this film camera button, zoom out, and I'm going to left click this light here because I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate it by then pressing Shift D. And now I don't want to move it in the wrong way, so I'm going to right click to cancel any movements, and I'm going to press G, and then I'm going to press Shift Z. This will make it so it will grab, G for grab, and then move this object, but only on the Y and X axis, excluding the Z axis. Remember that Z axis is the up and down, and I'll maybe move it to around here. I'll rotate around to see how it's looking, and maybe I'll pull it back by pressing G and X, like this. Then I'm going to come into my render view to see how that's looking. This is maybe a little too bright for my liking, so I might tweak around with this a little bit more. I moved it to around the middle here, and I feel like that looks pretty decent. But if you don't like it, you can go ahead and press X and delete it before rendering. Do keep in mind though, this is technically impossible in a way since we don't actually have a light coming here. So in certain scenes this may not look too realistic, but for our purposes I think this looks okay. We can also come up to my render properties here, and if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, we have our color management here, and we already have it set to medium high contrast, but we can experiment with the different modes to see what we think. And yeah, it looks like medium high contrast is going to be the best. I might also, with this light still selected, come to my green light bulb and maybe change the power down to something like 100. I also think this light might be a little bit too close as well, so I'm just going to press G and X to pull it right to the back. And I might even pull the backdrop back a little bit as well by left clicking it and pressing G and X, and I'll press the film camera to come back to here. In the end, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, I ended up moving this light to the right here, and that's that. It just involves a lot of experimentation until you find something you're satisfied with. Now I'm going to set up my output and render properties so we're ready to render our frames. So first I'm going to come to my output properties, and here I'm going to keep my frame rate on 30 frames per second and our resolution the same as our other animation, and here it says we've got our output set. I want to maybe give this something else, because if you remember, when we start to render our animation it will save them as numbers, and because these numbers are the same as our other frames they will just overwrite each other, which wouldn't be good. So we're going to create a brand new folder. So I'll first left click this folder button, and in my folder here I'm then just going to press the plus button, and I'll call this one hexagon animation frames. I'll then double click it and choose accept. I'll leave it at PNG, keep my frame range as is, and now we can come to our render settings. As we discussed in the rendering tutorial, we want to make sure we don't have these settings too high for an animation, and we can maybe even get away with a lower sample count here. I recommend maybe making it even lower if your computer is struggling with this animation, but for me I'm going to keep this at max samples at 100 and my noise threshold at 0.05. Make sure your denoise is on, and remember all these settings are in under render, not viewport. Viewport determines how things will look inside of here. Also, if you have a GPU, this would be the time to change the GPU compute. But I'm going to keep mine on CPU. I'm also in cycles. Also, you can set your clamping direct light to 5 to speed things up a little bit. And now we should be ready to render. If you like, you can do a test render by pressing render and then render image first if you want to get a rough idea how it's looking, or alternatively you can just start rendering the animation and check the frames as you go to see if you're happy with them. And then once you're kind of happy you can just let it do its thing in the background. But I'm just going to go ahead and press render and then render animation, and your frames will go ahead and start rendering. Once your animation is finished, you should have all your frames in here and it will look something like this. Great job on completing today's lesson. In the next lesson we're going to be finishing off this tutorial by turning all of our frames into an animation, which we can view as a video MP4 file. There won't be a quiz for this lesson as it's mostly concepts we've covered already, and more this is just like a practice lesson to put everything we've learned into practice. But great job for making it through the course this far. Only one lesson left and then we're finished. Also, if you enjoy my teaching style, I also provide one-on-one coaching completed with personalized lessons and post-lesson quiz questions and support. Link in the description if you're interested. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. You can also support the channel by making a one-time donation through Super, but even just liking, subscribing and sharing if you enjoyed is more than enough to support the channel. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.